Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mark Moss Show, where we talk about the decentralized revolution, whatever that means. Talking about the way the world is changing, and we look at it through the lens of politics, finance, and technology to understand what's going on in the world, because it's changing. As I say, the world we're going into is not the one that we're leaving behind, and man, is it moving fast. It is moving fast. We're going to talk about a lot today. We have a lot to cover. There is lots of news going on about the dollar losing its reserve status in the world. Lots of talk about Saudi Arabia joining the BRIC Nations. The dollar's losing the reserve currency status. Oil's being traded in yuan, not in the U.S. dollar. All these things. Last night, I got 2 emergency phone calls, one from my friend's wife, another one from my friend. I'm worried about my money in the bank. What's going to happen? So we're going to break all this down. We're going to break down what is going on with the dollar, with the reserve currency status, what's going on with China and Russia getting together and conspiring. Yes, that's a real thing. Xi and Putin getting together. What's going on with the BRIC nations? What about Saudi Arabia? What if the dollar loses reserve currency status? What does that mean for your money, your purchasing power, and all these other things? So we got a big hour to go through, lots to talk about and discuss. So I want to break this down. Like I said, I had to get on 2 emergency phone calls just last night to diffuse this situation, to walk people off of a cliff. And so I want to break it down for you. Now, I want to say it's reached a feverish pitch because we saw Fox News talking about this, talking about the dollar losing its reserve status. And you might understand or believe that, Fox would talk about that because Fox talks about things like that. But it was on CNN. CNN was talking about it. So when CNN talks about it, you have to imagine, what are the conversations like that's led to it getting to that point? Imagine the conversations that are happening in Washington, and other newsrooms before CNN actively comes out and talks about the dollar losing its reserve status in the world. So what does that mean, reserve status? What does it mean if it's losing the reserve status? And more importantly, what do you care? What do you care? Well, let's talk about that. Again, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to the Mark Moss Show. We talk about, of course, the decentralized revolution, and part of this is how the world is breaking apart from a unipolar world into a multipolar world. So the U.S. since 1944 has been the global superpower, and the U.S. dollar has been the global reserve currency of the world. In 1944, the entire world, let's go back a little bit further. All right, so there's been lots of superpowers in the world, and there's been lots of reserve currencies in the world. I'm not going to go back all the way through history, but just know that England and the pound sterling was the superpower, and the pound sterling was the reserve currency of the world before the dollar. Now, so we don't need to go back too much further than that. But what happened is England and France went to war against Germany. England and France got together to go to war against Germany. That's known as World War I. And in that war, they didn't have enough money to go to war. They should have never gone to war. But the United States bankers, J.P. Morgan, said, oh, don't worry, we'll loan you a bunch of money. So they loaned them a bunch of money to go to war, which basically bankrupted them. And these nations spent all the money they had to go to war, and they had to give up all of their gold. And the U.S., when they spent all that money to go to war, where do they spend it? Well, they spent it for supplies. So most of that money actually came back to the United States, and the United States was able to stockpile the gold. The United States didn't want their debt, because if they lose the war, who's going to pay it? So we took their gold. And as a matter of fact, after the war, the United States I believe the United States owned 2/3 of all the gold in the world. The U.S. had the balance sheet, a fortress balance sheet, as it might be called. And so they had all the gold. And so basically the pound sterling kind of lost its place. They printed too much. It was inflating away. Nobody wanted to hold it anymore. The dollar now was kind of this strong currency because it had all the gold in the world backing it. And they went to 1944 to Bretton Woods Agreement. Now this went after World War II, so World War I, then to World War II. After World War II, 1944, the world got together and created what's known as the IMF, International Monetary Fund, and they declared from on high This is the new reserve currency of the world. And the way it worked is that the dollar would be pegged to gold. So you would be able to exchange 35 US dollars for 1 ounce of gold. It was always convertible. And so the dollar was a proxy. It was an IOU claim. It was backed by gold. And then all the currencies of the world would peg to the dollar. Well, all the currencies of the world are still pegged to the dollar, except for the dollar's not pegged to gold anymore. So when you hear things, you'll hear about, like with Bitcoin, for example, what's it backed by? Well, only debt has to be backed by something. The dollar was debt. It was redeemable. That debt, it was a debt certificate, an IOU, a promissory note that I could go redeem it for the specie, the gold that's back there. And so the dollar was debt. It was backed by gold. Today, the dollar's backed by nothing. So when they say, what's Bitcoin backed by? It's not backed by anything. Only debt is backed by something. What is gold backed by? What is oil backed by? Nothing. Oil is what oil is, right? Okay, so anyway, that kind of sums it up. Now, the dollar took over the reserve currency of the status of the world. It was backed by gold. Then what happened is the United States started printing way too many dollars. And the dollars weren't actually backed by all the gold. And people knew this. Everybody knew this. Americans were not allowed to go buy gold. In 1933, it was made illegal, as all the gold that Americans owned was seized, was stolen, and then it was made illegal. Americans couldn't own gold, not until 1975. In 1971, all these nations around the world were like, hey, America, we know what you're doing. The jig is up here. Like, we know what you're doing. You printed way too many dollars. We don't want these fake paper gold certificates. We want the gold. So the U.S. was trying to defend it, trying to pretend like that wasn't the case. So they're giving up all the gold, giving up all the gold, giving up all the gold. Finally, the gold's running out, which we still don't know how much gold is left today because, of course, they won't do an audit. And as I say all the time, the best way you stop rampant speculation, or as they like to call it, conspiracy theory, is just with transparency. They could just do an audit of the gold, but of course they won't, which then makes you think that they don't have the gold. Otherwise, they would just say they had it. They tell us how much they have, so then prove it. It's not like they're trying to keep it a secret. They tell us how much they have. Then prove it, but of course they won't. So the rumors, obviously, wild speculation. I think they don't have the gold because of the way the story goes. And so they were giving up the gold, trying to defend that peg. Finally, France sends over the warships to collect the gold. And President Richard Nixon, 1971 says, nope, no more gold. All right, so the U.S. defaulted, went bankrupt, wouldn't pay its debts. Then, how does the U.S. keep its reserve currency status in the world? Well, it went into something else backing it, and that was known as oil or energy. And so we have the birth of the petrodollar started in 1974. This is a very key piece of the story because the United States went to Saudi Arabia, which was the oil kingpin of the world, and said, hey, if you price all the oil in dollars, that means dollars are now backed by oil, then we will always protect you. So now we've entered the security agreement. We got their back, which of course is why when the whole World Trade Center bombings happened, Saudi Arabia got all this special treatment by President George Bush at the time. But that's a whole other story. But basically it was backed by the petrodollar. Now the reason why I'm telling you that is because the dollar status as the reserve currency of the world is now threatened by everybody. And specifically Saudi Arabia, which entered this agreement in 1974 to price all the oil, to sell all the oil in dollars, has now agreed to sell oil in Chinese yuan. Now, we know, I've been talking about this quite extensively, and I actually just tweeted this a little while ago. If you're not following me on Twitter, you should. So you can find me on Twitter at @1MarkMoss. That's just the number one, @1MarkMoss. And I tweeted this out earlier, and I said, if you have a party and then you start kicking people out of the party, eventually they go start their own party. And then you have no control over what they're doing because they're at their own party and you're not invited. And so that's basically what's happened. The dollar's been the reserve currency of the world, and we control that money through the SWIFT system, et cetera, and how the way the money's moved around, the financial system. And what the U.S. has done is continued to weaponize the dollar. If you do something we don't like, then we penalize you financially, financial sanctions. That could be in the form of penalties and fines and things like that, all the way to you're just completely kicked out of the financial system and you don't even get to use it anymore. And that's exactly what's happening. What we can see, sanctions being used as a U.S. policy tool has been growing. As a matter of fact, if we go back, I'm looking at a chart here from 2002, we can see under the Bush administration, we had very few sanctions. It started to be, like I said, the go-to policy tool, but it's only started escalating. Through Obama, it got higher. Through Trump, it got even higher. And under Biden, it has gone through the roof like a hockey stick, we call that, or like a parabolic run. And so what we can see is that the U.S. is accelerating this de-dollarization. So the dollar is the reserve currency of the world, and they're de-dollarizing it or forcing people to not use this reserve currency of the world by issuing these more than 10,000 unilateral sanctions on foreign entities. Now, that's just over the last 2 decades. 10,000 unilateral sanctions. And so again, back to what I tweeted, if you kick enough people out of the party, then they just go start their own party. When you take away people's ability, nations' ability to transact in the dollar-denominated global financial system, what happens? Do they die? Do they just go away and just crawl in a hole and die? No, they just find another way to do trade. Obviously, it seems so obvious that even a caveman could get it, so to speak. So a couple things I want to break down here. All right, so first of all, there's a difference between global reserve currency and global reserve asset. This is a very big distinction that a lot of people don't seem to understand. So what am I talking about? So the dollar is what we use as a currency. It's a medium of exchange. We use that to pay for things. We don't store our money, our life savings in dollars. Most people don't. And if you do, you probably shouldn't. Especially when you're a sovereign wealth fund or a sovereign nation where you have hundreds of billions or even trillions of dollars. You don't hold that in currency. You hold it in a reserve asset, in an asset. So even for me, and hopefully for you, I don't store all my wealth in dollars. I hold them in assets. I hold them in real estate. I hold them in gold. I hold them in Bitcoin. I hold them in some stocks, right? Those are assets. So what are you reserving your wealth in? What assets? And so think about nations. So they're not holding it in dollars, they're holding it in assets. Now, those assets have typically been, for the last 50 years or so, have been U.S. treasuries. The U.S. treasuries, that's debt, that's bonds, okay? And that has been the reserve asset. Now, what we're seeing is all this talk happening about now, oh my gosh, like I said, I got these phone calls last night from one of my buddies saying, I see all this talk, now oil is going to be sold in yuan. Okay, so now we see the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South America, now Saudi Arabia potentially, all of these countries, these BRICS nations, this bloc, now trading back and forth outside of the dollar. They're trading in yuan. Okay, so that's the currency side. But what are they using as their reserve asset? That is the key piece here. Now, you know that I like to talk about Bitcoin. I spent a long time writing about cryptocurrencies. And in cryptocurrencies, you have something called tokenomics. And that is all these cryptocurrencies created their own tokens. So they're basically like currencies. Now, they have to come up with some sort of a plan to figure out, to kind of game the system to get that token to be worth something. The most used token in the history of the world doesn't mean it has any value. So you have to figure out a way to do that. So like Chuck E. Cheese, for example, a lot of people use Chuck E. Cheese tokens. That doesn't have any value, though. Nobody stores their wealth in Chuck E. Cheese tokens. And so these tokens, they would practice what's called tokenomics. They have to figure out a way to get someone to actually save them, to pull them out of the system. So with Bitcoin, they say Bitcoin's a reserve asset. It's a store of value. So Bitcoin isn't being used as a currency. People are saving it, they're hoarding it, they're storing it. And so what all these, I think there's somewhere between 12 to 15% of Bitcoin. So just so you don't know, there's about there will never be more than 21 million Bitcoin. Never more than 21 million. There's roughly about 19 million in circulation today. The rest will be coming over the next 100 years. Of those 19 million, only between 12 to 15% are actively being traded, like for sale. The rest are put away in long-term storage. Because that's been put away in long-term storage, there's demand there. And it makes the circulating supply worth more, the scarcity. So all these other cryptocurrencies have tried to game the system. Nobody wants to save them or store those cryptocurrencies, so they game it. They'll do something called staking. Hey, if you lock these up and put them away, we're going to inflate it and we'll give you a piece of it. So think of it like that. So we have the dollar being used as this currency, but it's the treasuries that people are holding their money in that's giving it this value. So when you hear about Saudi Arabia and all these people trading in another currency, a yuan, it doesn't really matter. What are they saving in? Well, they're still buying U.S. treasuries. No one's saving their money in Chinese debt or bonds or Russian debt or bonds. They don't have the financial market to back that up. They don't have the open liquidity markets. They don't want them. They don't want them. They don't have them, and they're not built up that way. Now, what we're seeing, though, is something to be concerned with. I tweeted this out again today as well. And what we do have is, if you think about, we have periods where the dollar has been this reserve asset, reserve currency, and gold was the reserve asset. In 1971, the gold got swiped out, and it was U.S. Treasuries being the reserve asset. But what we can see since 2021, really since 2014, in 2014, China came out and made, actually it was 2013, China came out and made a statement. The PBOC, People's Bank of China, said, quote, no longer in China's interest to grow our foreign currency reserves. So they said that in 2013. So they announced they were going to start de-dollarizing. Russia and China both did. And so what we see since 2013, the amount of U.S. treasuries being purchased by foreign governments has been going down, while the amount of gold being purchased has been going up. So the dollar is still a reserve currency. The yuan can be also a major currency. But what are they saving in? And what we can see since 2013, the amount of savings in dollars, U.S. Treasury is going down and gold is going up. So that's a big difference. Now, so one of my friends, he called me last night and he said, hey, Mark, I see all this talk about this, and what's going to happen? I'm afraid that I'm going to wake up one day and my dollars are going to buy me half as much goods as they buy me now. The value of my dollars will drop in half. That's what he's afraid of. What should I do with my dollars? What should I do with my money in the bank, my savings? I'm afraid I'm going to wake up one day and it's going to buy me half as much. And I said something that shocked him, and it probably shocked you as well. And what that was is I said, so let me get this straight. You're afraid that you're going to wake up one day and your dollars are going to buy you half as much goods, right? He said, yeah. I said, well, since 2019, your dollars already do buy you half as much goods. And he's like, what do you mean? So I said, well, how much is your home worth today? He said, $4 million. I said, how much was your house worth 5 years ago? He said, $1.7 million. So your dollars buy you about 40% of the house that it would have bought you 5 years ago. Your dollars already do buy you 50% less. As a matter of fact, if we take a look at a couple just metrics so we can see this, we can see since January of 2019, the dollar has lost 60% to the S&P 500 index. All right? So does that make sense? When the stocks go up, it's not stocks going up, it's the value of your dollars going down. Why are the value of your dollars going down? Well, because the U.S. government, the Fed, the Treasury, et cetera, have increased the money supply by about 40% in that time period. When you hear about all this money printing, all these new acts, the Inflation Reduction Act and all these things, even now they're bailing out the banks. They have to create that money. They have to conjure it from thin air. As they create more money, it makes all the existing units of money worth less. It's theft. So if I came to your house and you had, $1,000 in your safe, and I took 500 of that, I took 50% of your money away, and I went and spent that on whatever I wanted, would that be theft? Of course it would be. Of course it would be. You would now be able to buy half of the goods and services that you could have bought before. You had $1,000. Now you only have $500. You can only buy $500 worth of goods and services. Meanwhile, I took $500 and went and spent it on whatever I wanted. That's exactly what the government does. So you have $100. Now you have $1,000 in the bank. The difference is the government doesn't take 500 from your 1,000. What they do is they print themselves more money, and they go spend on whatever they want. Whatever they want, like, giving a bunch of money to Ukraine, for example. And then your $1,000 buys you $500 worth of goods and services. So it wasn't that you didn't see your currency units go from 1,000 to 500, but what you can buy with the money did go from 1,000 to 500. And that's why it's silent. It's secret theft. You don't realize it, but it's the same thing. The government, gave themselves money and bought whatever they want with it, and what you can now buy with your money got cut in half. It's theft. It's not okay, and you have to understand that. So, but back to kind of the point that I'm making, he's afraid, and you might be afraid, that one day, because of what's happening, your dollars are going to buy you half as much goods and services. They already do. 60% less of the S&P 500, 77% less Bitcoin, and the median home price in the United States in January of 2019 was $313,000, and today it's $467,000. Yes, you buy 50% less home today in the same period. So we're already seeing it. So is it going to happen? Yes. My guess is in 5 years from now, your dollars buy you 50% less goods again. So stocks will be higher, real estate will be higher, and Bitcoin will be higher. And so the greatest fear he has is already here. We're already living it. Now, what else? A couple other things. I don't really want to get into the banking crisis because I've already covered that pretty extensively. If you want to catch me, if you want to get my opinions on the banking crisis, go to my main YouTube channel, Mark Moss, and just see the videos that I've done there. Numerous videos where I have all the charts and graphs. You can see them there on a video. I've also talked about it here on the podcast and the radio. Just go search the Mark Moss Show in your favorite podcast player, and you can find those back issues. But I do want to just address the other call that I had to take last night. Is from my wife's friend. I don't typically like to take these calls because I'm too busy to take calls even from my own friends. But they were also worried. They sold their house. They have money sitting in the bank, and they're worried about their money in the bank. What are we going to do? And I said, well, over what time frame? Like, are you worried about it over the next 5 years, 10 years, 5 months? We want to buy another house right away. We just don't want to lose our money in a banking collapse. So they weren't worried so much about losing it through inflation, like my first friend was asking about. They were more worried about it in a banking collapse, what happens to the money. And so I'm just going to address that for you real quick. What I told them is, first of all, as I've already kind of said multiple times, keep your money in bank accounts less than the FDIC insured amount, $250,000. That's just step number one. That should be good enough. Second of all, if you're still worried about it, go to a big bank. The big banks are deemed too big to fail. Janet Yellen has told us this as much. Who are the big banks? They're Wells Fargo, JP Morgan, Citibank. Those banks are too big to fail. Bank of America. They've told us they're going to bail them out, and so you're safe there. If you're still worried about it, and maybe you should anyway, instead of keeping your money in the bank, go put it into U.S. Treasuries, where today you can keep them liquid under 2-year durations and make about 3.5%, which is way better, about 300 times better than the amount of money you can make sitting in your bank account. So those are some things that you should do if you're kind of worried about it. But let's jump back into this de-dollarization and exactly what's going on here. So in the CNN video, they talked about the dollar losing its reserve status, and they called it a death by 1,000 cuts. Death by 1,000 cuts. And really, it's the United States that's doing it to itself. It's the United States race to lose here. But it's a death by 1,000 cuts. It's all these little sanctions. It's all these little government programs. It's all this increased spending. It's all of these things that both, one, create more monetary units, which steals your purchasing power, which means people don't want to hold it. And two, it continues to erode the trust in the banking sector, in the dollar's credibility. Now, as I kind of said before, nobody's putting their debt, no one's using the Chinese bond market or credit markets or the Russian markets as a place to store their reserves because they don't trust the Chinese either. You want to keep your money, you want to store your reserve assets somewhere that has a strong rule of law. That would be something that would have like due process. Before they just arbitrarily steal your money, they would go through at least some sort of a due process. So a strong rule of law. There has to be trust there. The problem is, as I said, Russia, China, whatever country, fill in the blank, doesn't have that trust. The U.S. does. But the U.S. is doing everything it can to undermine its own trust. It's a death by 1,000 cuts. Yes, the dollar is losing its place as the reserve currency of the world. Yes, other nations are starting to use yuan to trade, to settle trade. Yes, Saudi Arabia, who's been backing the currency with their oil for all these decades, is now going to start selling it in other currencies. Yes, all those things are true. And so, yes, all those things continue to build into this narrative that we have. What I guess what I'm trying to point out today is that, yes, all of these things are happening, and yes, they've all been happening. But it's not time for a panic. It's not like something's going to happen in the next week or month or year that all of a sudden is going to destroy the world. It's the death by 1,000 cuts. The U.S. is slowly bleeding out. So what we want to do is we want to be aware of the situation. We want to watch the situation. We want to prepare for the situation. We want to be directionally correct, but we don't need to be full of panic. And I guess, I'm all for making sensational headlines, but I'm just trying to take away some of that panic and show you that it's already happening. Like I said earlier, with my friend called me up on the phone, freaking out last night, worried that one day he's going to wake up and his money's going to buy him 50% less. And I said, it already does. It already does buy you 50% less. Have you filled up your car with gas? How much has gas changed in the last 4 years? It's lost 50% to gasoline. What about milk? What about eggs? What about steak? Yes, you buy 50% less milk, eggs, and steak than you did 5 years ago. So it's already happened, and this will continue to happen. So while I'm certainly not downplaying it, it is real and it is happening. And it is, yes, you do need to do something to protect yourself. I already gave you some ideas. We're going to talk about more here in a second. But at the same time, I think we don't need to be, I don't know. Like I said, I suppose I can be sensational too, so I'll take it somewhat easy on it. But this is continuing to happen. Now, in this CNN video that I was referencing, where they said it was death by 1,000 cuts, they said, we searched the world over looking for the next reserve currency, but there is none. And that's a key piece here. And so that's the thing that I want to hit on for a second, because we have this situation where everybody's looking for the next global reserve currency. Okay, the dollars, so as we go through history, we can see lots of currencies have been that. Like I said, the dollar took over the pound sterling. So everyone's looking for the next. What is the next? And as the CNN host said, we scan the world for the next reserve currency, but there is none. Now, why is there none? Well, there's two reasons, I would say. The first reason is because of the big global trend that's happening, which is the decentralization, the deglobalization trend. That's happening. It's my thesis that I talk about each and every week here on the show, and there's no stopping that. We see it everywhere we go, and this is what we're talking about right now. The dollar's homogeny is being challenged and being broken, and now we're starting to use other currencies around the world. And as the world continues to shift back from a globalized, centralized world to a deglobalized, decentralized world, no one's going to agree on one currency. There's no global unipolar party to decree from on high, this is the new one, this is it. Like there's nobody there. The voice, the globalized, unified voice is gone. It's all broken apart. And everybody's going to use whatever they're going to use. And this is also a big part of just where we are as a society, as a world, where we are at this point in time in history. I did a interview recently with the author of a book. I don't know if the interview is published yet, but with the author of the book called The Revolt of the Public. And basically it talks about how, things change, technology changes, which of course is what I talk about all the time. How the printing press changed things because it allowed us to think and act on our own. But the internet has also done the same thing. And as I was talking to him, I was thinking, and we were talking about how, like, when I was a kid, we all listened to the same music. We all watched the same TV shows. We all read the same things. There was when I was a kid, there was 3 channels on TV. That was it. Before cable, there was 3 channels. right? And so we all listened and watched the same things. And so it was very easy to get everybody on the same page when everybody only had a couple of choices. Today we have millions of choices. We'll never get back on the same page ever again. The internet has allowed each of us to find our own tastes, our own interests, pursue our own passions, and allows us to all find this corner of the internet that serves our own very specific use case and niche. And so that's part of why it's technology that changes things. It changes the way that we organize, communicate, and so forth. And so as this world continues to break apart, he states in the book that our system of governance today is not compatible with the technology that we have. So as we went into the industrial age, we started working in factories, and they figured out how to get all of these people, these masses, into a factory and basically get them to all do the same amount of work, managing the masses by above, central planning. And then our current form of government was designed off of that to manage the economy from above, a central form of governance. But now we don't have large-scale manufacturing like that anymore. Now manufacturing is done all over the world in little bits and pieces, and then it comes together for final assembly. We don't have that anymore, and neither does the very centralized global governance system work on top of that anymore. That's done. It's over. It's never coming back. Well, I don't want to say never. Never is a long time. But it's not coming back anytime soon, not in our lifetimes for sure. And so as the world continues to break apart, they're going to continue to use different currencies. Someone's going to go back to using gold, and someone's going to go to using nickel, and someone's going to use oil to trade, and then there's going to be different currencies. For me, I'm using Bitcoin. Bitcoin is my reserve asset. Bitcoin is lots of people's reserve assets. It's now Fortune 500 companies like MicroStrategy's reserve asset. It's even nations like El Salvador's reserve asset. Now, you may think that Bitcoin is stupid. Great. So use gold. Gold can be your reserve asset. Someone else might still want to keep dollars. I don't recommend it. Then keep dollars as your reserve asset. You can figure it out for yourself. But the point is that we're all going to be using different things as this world continues to break apart. Of course, the government doesn't like that. I should say specifically the U.S. government doesn't like that. And even bigger specifically, the Western governments that can control the money don't like that. They want to keep you locked in. If there's an exit that you're allowed to get out and exit the system, then the whole system collapses. Back to that kind of tweet that I talked about in the beginning, where if I'm having a party and I start kicking everybody out of the party, then all of a sudden you have your own party. I have no control over you. So this is the conundrum. This is the dilemma that the government finds itself in. If they continue to kick people out, which they already have, and it's too late, right? The animals are out of the barn. What do they say? It's like closing the barn door after the animals are gone or whatever. It's like it's too late. The animals are gone. They've already started their own party. They're not coming back. Now, what they're trying to do is close the barn doors and keep whoever's left there now. But instead of kicking you out, they want to beat you into submission. Instead of kicking you out because you're too noisy, they'll just put a gag in your mouth. Instead of kicking you out because you're moving around too much, they'll just tie you to the floor or break your legs. That's what the path is now. And we see this in the form of central bank digital currencies coming, and even more specifically, this new bill that just came out called the Restrict Act, that in my opinion is the most dangerous bill that's ever been put forth, ever in the history of America. I warned that this was going to be coming, and yet here it is. I did a full video on my YouTube channel. Just search that if you want to go check it out. I don't have time to break that all down for you right now. Maybe next week I will. Drop me some comments on social media if you want me to break it down. Hit me up on social media at @1MarkMoss. Leave me a comment. Send me an email. Tell me you're listening to the show. Tell me you like it. Tell me what you want me to talk about. If I'm going to break that down, I will, or go watch it on my main YouTube channel. Just search Mark Moss. Of course, as always, you can watch these and listen to me at the same time on the Market Disruptors YouTube channel, your favorite podcast player. Just search The Mark Moss Show. But it's real. It's happening. We see it all over. Hopefully this brings a little bit of ease to you. Not that it's not happening, but it's not that something bad is going to happen tomorrow, but it is happening, and you do need to take the steps to prepare and protect yourself. That's what I got. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time.